Welcome back to the World Through Zen Eyes podcast. I am Mingan I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert. Just to go with today's theme, here I am once again, 1 week older than the last podcast.
1 week older. Indeed. That is the theme. A listener, Jane, in fact, we have a name this time, says, since we all will face it, how does Zen Buddhism see aging gracefully? How does Zen Buddhism bring peace and confidence to a person who is aging? Well, let's start from the root. If we're bringing up Zen specifically, the Buddha, before leaving the kingdom, asks his father. You know, there's the cinema retelling of the story,
Right.
and then there is the scriptural retelling of the story, and then some apocryphal retellings of the story. But so he asks his father. He said, "I will not leave," because he wants to leave. Right? He says, "I will not leave if you answer a set of questions for me." And, you know, perhaps the king thought to himself, yeah, what you got? He said, well, why do people grow old? Teach me why people grow old and I will not leave. Why do people get sick? Explain that to me. I will not leave. Why do people die? Explain that to me and I will not leave. Why do we have to part with people? Right. And so this kind of makes up the yolk of the question that the Buddha never forgets from the time when he leaves, or in fact, not even from the time he leaves, from his early childhood, if we really think about it. Death and life and coming and going and parting, having lost his mother at a young age, having then seen if we just punctuate the whole story with the more known stories of the young Siddhartha, young prince, attending the harvest festival and seeing this worm get sort of the plow cuts open the soil and the worm comes out and it's eaten, and this toiling of the people as he's being carried on a palanquin and sees the people carrying it, sweating under the beating sun and the suffering and that. So this big wad of questions keeps on building and building and building and building in his mind. And so he presents these questions to which his father really has no answer. And this is the beauty or the awe of Siddhartha and who later becomes the Buddha, is that he never loses the question or questions, but essentially it's one kind of thing. When we come into this world, we leave this world and dying and this whole suffering, he never loses it. Us, on the other hand, let me just speak for myself, this is thing, and I get drawn into it, and then later on something else pops up and you get drawn into it. And the yom is this thing we carry in the foreground, the mindfulness, if you will, but the mindfulness of what? The mindfulness of what it is that what knot are you trying to crack? And so the Buddha never loses that throughout his life. And so, of course, then not really the initial teaching that the Buddha gives after enlightenment, because after enlightenment there is another teaching. He preaches another sutra, but not in the earthly realms, but in the heavenly realms, But the first teaching that he does, in fact, give down here, if you want to call it down here.
He took the elevator down to the
elevator
earth
down.
floor.
Yes. And he teaches the Four Noble Truths, right? The Sasangje. And the Sasangje really speak to the discovery of these questions that he had. Ko jib myolto. Ko meaning suffering. What is the human suffering? And so he lists, right, the various human sufferings. What is the cause of said suffering? Is there a way out of said suffering? And in fact, then where is the way out of it? Like a physician diagnosing an ailment, right? And the first noble truth, the first lineup, Sengno Byongsa, we have is birth, old age, sickness, and death as the fundamental sufferings that one experiences. Then we have, separation from that or those we love, being in the presence of that which we don't like so much, etc., etc. But so he never loses that big question of aging, of suffering, of sickness, of coming and going. And so that's becomes the sort of basis, the fundamental teaching, right, of the Four Noble Truths. These things are in fact suffering. Why are they suffering, etc., etc.? Fundamentally speaking, it's attachment and grasping and clinging is the source. So this is kind of the background or the backdrop of where the Zen looks at it. The Zen acknowledges that these things are in fact parts of life. So what is gracefully aging is understanding, accepting, and not denying. Right? The denial of things that are to come. And if we are wise enough in our lives, we can, out of the lips of others, out of the lips of those wiser than I, out of the lips of those who have seen the path that I am traveling, we could drink out of their lips the wisdom that they speak, then we have a chance to be ready. We have a chance to prepare. We have a chance to having had thought about what is coming up. But when we live so caught up in the kind of going-ons, but also if we live so caught up in the denial of these things, and we see this unfortunately to an extreme degree in our society, right? The plastic surgery, the this and that, the denial of aging, the shunning away of the old and the elderly, and lock them up in some facility, because who wants to be, looking at, aged people with tremors in their hand, for example. It does something. It almost cleaves and interrupts the chain of human interaction, right? And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But
let me give a warning to everyone. As the Buddha said, old age comes to us all, right? And I think in this fleeting thing, we try to capture it and not let it go. And there's this struggle that people have with this, and there's a lot of money being spent in this industry to maintain a certain look or maintain your youth,
right?
Maintain elastic, stretchy skin. And if I were to say it in a voice, there's this quote. It has to do with death, but I think it pertains to old age very well too. If I can do it and imagine I was an old man or old woman saying this to the audiences. Where you are, I once was. Where I am, you will one day too be. And I think that's something that people should really contemplate. And it's a river that just flows and it can't be stopped. You cannot turn the river flow in another direction.
Right. So preparedness is one way, sort of understanding and knowing that what is coming. If you are invited on a hiking trip and you're told what the destination is, you bring the appropriate equipment. And if you're going mountain climbing, you bring mountain climbing equipment.
Sure.
If you're
skydiving,
if you're going skydiving, you
better bring the
skydiving.
parachute, right?
Yeah. So you bring the things that are needed, or you at least prepare yourself mentally and emotionally and be ready for, an arduous journey if it's going to be an arduous journey. That way we're not swept and taken by surprise when the things come. And it's in that when things come by surprise and we are unprepared, we panic because this is the usual experience, right? Of something all of a sudden happens and the mind panics and can't think clearly and makes further decisions and choices that aren't really beneficial. So, so far it seems a little bit dire. There are three things that as we age one must prepare, and we could say, if we parallel these different perspectives, the Hwangap, which is the 60-year-old birthday in the Korean tradition, at least. The lunar calendar cycles in 60-year cycles, and so Hwangap, which is what you call one of the names, at least for 60th birthday, is traditionally viewed as sort of the end of life in a sense, right? And it's but it's not. It's sort of it's end of life in a sense that it's that now the focus on the new life is what takes.
Prepare for what comes next.
Prepare for what comes next, and it is, and we see the same parallels in, for example, in Hinduism, right? In Hinduism, there's similar stages of life, 3 or 4, depending on how you count, but it's that similar idea. We begin our life as a sort of student, as a youth. Right, then we become what they would sort of refer to as a householder. You take on your responsibility of your family, etc., etc., and then at a certain age you relinquish all of those things and you throw yourself entirely and completely into spiritual pursuits. And that satisfies sort of the flow of life. It satisfies that in youth we need to take on information and study, and you're the student in life, and then midlife is you work, you have a family, you do those things, so you're not,
you leave your mark,
right.
You give to society,
right.
You raise your family,
it's participation,
you leave an impact, you participate
in society. So it's not if everyone skips that step, and then lastly you're kind of absolved of all those things. And Nietzsche has it in, I think, Thus Spake Zarathustra. He has these metamorphoses, and he presents it as a transformation on a spiritual level, but might as well be. And he says we start off life as a camel. So there's a camel, then you're a lion, and then you're a child. And so as a camel is a toiling animal. You pile on me, right? So we take on the education, we take on the status quo, we take on the societal norms and all of these things, pile all of that on me. And so that's the kind of first stage, if you will. And in the second stage, the lion becomes a little bit rebellious. And so the lion then tries to and in Nietzsche's presentation of this, the lion fights the dragon of thou shalt, right? And this dragon is the dragon of, again, this adherence to the norms, adherence to the way things are, the status quo, this kind of thing. And the lion is a little rebellious and wants to break free from these things to kind of make something of himself, in a sense, you know. And then the last one is the child, and the child is marked by a renewal, a new life. So we have this parallel between whether it's the Korean, you know, traditional birthday kind of philosophy, or the Hindu philosophy, and then Nietzsche presents it in that way as well, where you become a child, and so this is the joyous and youthful, and you kind of no longer care of what the society says, you know, and it's you know, you just picture, you know, an old man with sandals, white socks, and they don't care
all
about
the fashion papas
right.
they want, right?
They don't care about any of
they're
that.
above all the rules at that time.
They're somehow freed from certain things, and this is because they've been through life sufficiently enough, and they've arrived at a understanding that it's not all these things that are, you know, shiny and beckoning aren't necessarily the thing, or maybe they're just not the thing for them.
I have a breakdown of the categories that was, I believe, like a little riddle, sometimes even like a little bit on the joking side. It is what animal in the beginning stage of their life walks on 4 legs, in the middle they walk on 2 legs, right, and in the end they walk with 3 legs.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, and that's the human being, right? You have the baby, then the adult in the middle of their life, and then in the end, the old man or woman needing the cane.
Yeah,
for support.
It is so the thing to prepare, and this is, you know, kind of not necessarily for everybody, but after the Hwangap, after the sort of 60 years, right? What many people then are faced with is a sort of I'm going to call it a poverty, but
well, they have the term called fixed income. So
right, so it's the suffering
doesn't necessarily be poverty, but you know, there's no more overtime. There's no more. You know, it's just the same amount coming in. So it becomes a bit more of a challenge for some people.
So we could say that's the kind of, you know,
and it's never 100. I don't think there's any retirement that's 100% of what you were making at the end. It's usually a lower percentage too on top of that, right?
So we have one. That's the one thing, right? It's the financial element. Then the second thing that is frequently, you know, kind of befalls a person is health and sickness and health. You know, generally speaking, just that even if it's a natural decline, it doesn't necessarily have to be some sickness per se, but life, as we say, is a sexually transmitted disease with 100% mortality rate. And so it's very, you know, possible that just by being healthy, right, still, you know, your skin is wrinkles because your body doesn't hold the water, and you know, you're the healing of the cut that used to take 3 days now takes, you know, a week, or festers and doesn't want to. And
regardless of whether what your health status is, one thing is a universal truth. Whatever you are able to do at whatever speed, at whatever rate, for whatever length of time in your 20s,
right,
it's not going to be the same when you get older. And when there's this comparison, I hear time and time again, people can put themselves in a state of misery because they mourn the loss of who they were.
Right.
When I was X, Y, and Z, I was able to do 200 push-ups.
Yeah, it's you know,
there's always going to be, you're never going to be able to do things the same way after 60.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to pick up as the same amount. You're not going to be able to work for as long. Like you said, your body's not going to heal as quickly. You know, your brain isn't going to be as sharp, as quick as it was when it was in its prime, right? And
Right. It's the understanding of what is, and not perpetuating some delusion. You know, I mean,
that's the. Mm-hmm.
you know, if we're dredging up some silly images, you know, this elderly man in a retirement home whistling at the 20-some-odd-year-old
Yes.
nurses, you know,
Thinking
what are
he
you
can handle
thinking,
that?"
Grandpa? you don't have nothing going on for you, in a
Yeah.
sense of,
Mhm.
of what you were imagining in your
Yeah.
mind. So this idea of knowing where we stand in life, and so then the third, so we have that kind of, we could say the financial challenges is what comes,
Mm.
the health challenges is what comes, or just simply aging, and then also we have the, we could say in a sense, loneliness, right? But it's loneliness in a sense that many of the friends have passed away. Children, if you had children, have gone away and they're living their own lives. Not to say that they're not. I mean, we have to understand. You could be living with somebody. You could be living with your children, but your children are of a different era.
Mm-hmm.
They are of a different world.
The interests are
The
completely
interest
different.
and all of that. So there is some kind of struggle with the sense of loneliness, in a sense.
There is.
Now,
Sometimes they end up living alone, right? If you could have been married for 50, 60 years and your spouse passes, your children are all grown, your grandkids are involved in school and things like that. And, you know, people live by themselves, or
Right.
they end up living in a senior home. Yeah, so there is this case. I remember when my grandma was alive, she always wanted those phone calls, right, to check in on her. That really brightened up her day, because there was a sense of loneliness.
Yeah, and it's
She had this poem that she made, and it was in reference to the toothbrushes. It's like my whole life, you know, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, and I always saw 2 toothbrushes, and it didn't hit me so hard, the loss of my husband, until one day I went in and there was only one. Well, actually, I think she went further back. When you have kids, it's like 4 toothbrushes, right? She had,
Yeah.
then the kids got up, moved out, and then it was 2, her and my grandfather, and then in the end, there was just 1. You know, so this is
right,
a
but
true
it's
reality.
not. Yeah, so this is, you know, Zen doesn't veil over realities to kind of be like, oh, they're there, right? These are
No,
real
I think you do a
things.
disservice to people,
Right.
because you don't prepare them. You don't develop the adequate mental or physical skills to be able to function at that if you don't prepare for it.
Right.
And that's,
And so those are the realities kind of it. However, that's not the whole story, because we do have to, and you know, perhaps maybe for the young people listening, there is a wealth of life that's captured in the people. They don't know the technology. They're not interested, or they can't kind of enlighten you to the technological new of what's going on, you know, right now on the
Tell me
market.
about it.
What's this? What's
my
that?
grandmother, I'll never forget, she would call me probably twice a week because at one point my father ended up getting for her satellite dishes because she wanted to see all these Spanish channels that she couldn't normally get. And my goodness, the box that it came with, at least twice a week, I had to either somehow figure out how to explain to her how to turn the box on, or,
Right.
you know, yeah, she had 2 remotes because one controlled the box, one controlled the TV, and heaven forbid the TV got on a different channel. And the box had to be, to get access to the box, I think had to be on like channel 3.
Right,
So
right.
I have many memories of having to go like at
The universal
8, 9 o'clock
remote,
at
the
night
universal remote
to go there
story.
to just change the channel back and
Yeah.
then be off on my merry way, because it was just too complex for her. It was beyond her time.
Yeah, so they can't help you in that way. The elderly, that is, or the older.
Yeah.
But what they do have is something sacred and human, some testament to a human spirit. Their lives, they've lived long enough to be really a precious thing that is not a well that is not drawn from, and what we get, like that's what I said at the beginning, it seems and feels that if the young do not sit at the feet of the elders, and if they don't let them tell their stories, there's a
wealth of
interruption.
knowledge, yeah.
There's an interruption because, and we have these. So there, I saw, and I want to say it was in a form of a cartoon, or maybe it was a book. I don't recall anymore, but it was. I think it was a Korean story too, of the parents take a daughter to visit grandma, or is grandma staying with them, or I think grandma is moved in with them, and the daughter sees the grandma kind of getting older and older, and one day she asks, I think the dad, it's grandma's getting shorter. And the way he presents it's kind of cute. He says, yes, if you notice that grandma's getting shorter, and she's becoming more almost like a child. Now we have to feed her the way that that you do a child. But did you notice that as grandma's getting shorter, you're getting taller, right? And you're getting grown up. So like it's grandma's giving up her essence, in a sense, that is pouring into you. So she's shrinking because she's giving her height to you, and that kind of thing.
That's cute.
So it was lovely way to kind of present it, that there's absolutely some life giving, something that if we don't tend to, and if we don't consciously visit, we're going to miss things that the technology can't furnish us with.
Yeah.
And the wisdom of life, the sacred human, its strength, its of human spirit, and all those.
They're torchbearers. They give us the echoes from the past, from an era that I never lived.
No.
Not only that, plus they have so many rich life experiences that they can transmit. And I think when you go back to the more tribal societies, the oral tradition was very important. I think they would sit, I can see it in my mind, where they would sit around the campfire, and the elders, they were sacred. Right. And they transmitted the ways of the past to the future generations. And the children sat around to listen to those stories and listen to those teachings. And that's why I think it's something that we need to return to. And if anything, we look at the spirit of Zen and how Chabi, compassion, is one of the cornerstones and one of the fundamental principles that Sakyamuni Buddha taught. Yeah, we need to have compassion for our grandparents and understand that they are jewels of knowledge, jewels of experience that we need to respect and honor and really think about, right? Because just like a lightning flash that could be taken at any moment. Some people say they're on borrowed time, right? That's a nice way of saying
we're all on borrowed time.
Yeah, we're all are, but that's a nice way of saying, yeah, they're going to be gone soon, right?
Yeah. And so this idea of aging, again, it's we kind of picked up at the 60-year-olds. But that's not, when the Buddha presents the Four Noble Truths, and when he says aging, it says birth, aging, old age, then death. When he says aging, it's not 60.
No.
It's a minute in. You're born, and a minute in, you are aging. And every minute after that, you are aging. And aged to the self that was so a minute ago. And so this idea of aging and gracefully aging really is also an idea of How do we gracefully live life and the whole entirety of it? If we wait
Too late.
for the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and on,
Too late.
we are missing something in life. The aging process is a process, and it starts from the very first day. And to say then what is graceful aging is graceful living. Graceful aging is graceful living. It's graceful every day. It's being graceful in a sense, and in the minutiae of day, and the special things of day. But it's a day by day by day. For the entirety of our lives is the aging and the gracefully doing so. Like you said, compassion is a beautiful grace. Knowing thyself is a beautiful way to be. Being cautious at how much we twist and warp and contort ourselves to fit something that is transient, fads and things. If you read if you read a book, and I think Thomas Merton, in one of his talks, talks about, he was speaking to a group of nuns, and he was talking about how should a monastic read and discern what they read in terms of news and things of that. And he used as an example a article from a magazine about women living cloistered life, nuns living cloistered life, and he was really kind of nitpicking at the bits and pieces of it. See, in this place here, this word, we just pass it over, but it leaves a sense, right? And it leaves a sense that is misleading. So, and he goes through the article in that way to kind of dissect it and say, well, we can't just gobble up what is. And this idea of what we contort to, and this is more so difficult nowadays where information is just bombarding us. And and so he says he was talking about a new high school book, high school reading or something that was being presented, and he says, I never got a chance to read so and so. And he says, well, there are certain so-and-sos that come and go so quickly, as fads do, right? And one, there's really no sense of mourning the fact that you didn't get the chance to read so-and-so, because if it's so quickly that it passes through it, he was talking about hippies, and says, if we the monastics now decided, we should be like the hippies to make the teachings more timely and available to the people. By the time we get to be hippies, the hippies are going to be long gone. It's a 3-year, it's a 3-year cycle, and 3 years later everything moves on, and but there are things that are timeless, and those things are the gems amidst of all that. I mean, how much soil do you have to sift through to get a morsel, a piece of gold? And it's that kind of idea. As we go through life, aging gracefully, I think also means not losing ourselves. There's a grace in that.
Yeah, I think there was a book that I believe a nurse wrote, and I can't recall the name of it at the time, and what the project was where she went to interview people at the last stage of their life, and she made like the top 5, of course, regrets. And I believe one of them was that I wish I would have lived as my authentic self.
Right.
So I think that it goes with the point that you're making, is to live a genuine life.
And when we don't when we don't engage consciously in living, the way that Zen kind of calls us to do, if we leave it up to the sort of automatic acquisition of wisdom and authentic self. I think people get it, and we see that there was a study that came out suggesting that depression with the elderly was spiking or something to that effect. But somebody had decided we should really look into the details of this, right? And what happened is the interpretation, wrongly so, was that the elderly they don't have as rich a social life. And so supposedly that was the indication of depression. I might be kind of, dancing here on some. But anyway, the follow-up was that when they did in fact check in with the elderly, and this is again the kind of thing we do. We just, there's the elderly. Let's do for them. And so like we make up our mind, because the elderly are without a voice largely, and we make up our mind. We're going to tell them what it is, and I almost felt like that study said, "Oh, this is what's going on in your life. So you're getting depressed because you're not socially active, right?" But when they actually spoke to that human beings, right, what they found out what was going on is that the elderly were trimming their social lives. They were trimming the branches on their social tree, right? And this wasn't that these branches had died off and broken off. This was that they consciously, right? And there's a wisdom in that, right? Like what tethers into the world are not feeding me in a sense. And it's not. You could snip those off. The trees do it naturally, right? And the plants do it naturally. If the thing is not feeding me on a profound level, if it's not feeding my soul, right, then and if worse, if it's draining, but just the fact that it is. So this trimming of their social tree was a self-care move on their part. Also was, they finally realized, it's like, I don't need this. I don't need this nonsense in my life, and so you organize your life and the things that are in it, that are helping you find your authentic self. And then lastly, of course, we have to mention, I think, the idea of, depending on what your belief system is, but the idea of the hereafter, and whether it's reincarnation. We should do a topic on reincarnation,
because Dr. Ian Stevenson out of the University of Virginia has a lot of research on that, plus all other stuff that we have from Zen Buddhism.
And plus there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, and a lot of fixations and kind of a view of reincarnation that is limiting, and one-sided. And this, I won't spoil it. So this is the other side of it, the one side of the multitude. But there are main two sides of reincarnation. We could kind of divide it that way. So if we consider the reincarnation to mean after this life, where do I go? Then the time, because when we age, we have the time. We are in fact, if things played out, as we say, things are less in life. There's less distractions. And one has kind of come to some realization, some conclusion, like, oh, those things are not really. I don't really need this, and so the interest is it's almost like an ango. Ango is a meditation retreat, right? Where you lessen the amount of distractions that distract you from whatever practice, whatever thing you're trying to develop. And in this case, naturally being done so by life and the way that things go, the older person has available to them on the account that frequently they don't have the responsibilities to tend to the other things. They could tend to their soul.
It's almost like life is funneling you to that point,
right?
To a solitary retreat point.
And we see that, and this doesn't mean you go into the mountains and any of that, but we see that kind of naturally, and I think there's an element with naturally. There's an element of fear that the person begins to sort of understand. Well, this journey, this one particular journey, is coming. There's an end somewhere there, and so they run to the church.
That it gets louder and louder the closer you get, right? When we're youthful,
the clock ticks very at a different way.
We pretend it's not there,
right. Yeah, and that was the cliche when I was a child. I was raised Roman Catholic, and that's you see the elderly flocking to churches, and whether they were pious and religious throughout their whole lives or not, so the kind of joke was like, oh, they smell the end coming, so they're last minute
in the church,
last minute,
donations.
yeah. There's
the sound is getting louder and louder for them, and they realize the end is near. So,
So
people deal with that in different ways.
The big thing in you mentioned the nurse and the famous saying, "The truth sits on the lips of dying men." The regrets and the grudges and all those things, the sooner we unburden ourselves from them, and the irony of, as I think of this right now, and as I say these words, the irony of it becomes that this idea of aging as the time to do it really strikes to be the aging from the sooner you could start it, the better. If you've been here for 5 minutes, right, as a human being, you're born, and here you are, 5 minutes, your aging is there, and you really ought to do the work, start the work wherever you are, at the very moment here. Don't wait, because, have you moved? Meaning, when you move from your apartment to a new apartment, or from a house to another house, from a closet, you have no idea how much stuff
is in a closet,
is in there. How much stuff is in your house? How much stuff is in the basement? How much stuff is in the attic? How much stuff is in the garage? How much stuff you have? Maybe you're paying for storage, right? So much stuff, and to unburden ourselves of things is going to be an automatic element as we come to sort of end of this life. And the less unburdening, or the less burdens that we have, in a sense, these should have, could have, would have, the holy trinity of regret, these grudges and these things that weigh us down, in a sense. There's a imagery of this, I think, in the Jain tradition, where the practitioner is to, almost as if you were, purify oneself, and as if the souls had color, and it's the darker the color, the heavier, the heaviness of color black, and then the lighter the colors, the lighter, figuratively and literally, and so the idea is to become sort of as light or clear, I guess, and then sort of float up into heavens, type of thing. And this same idea of the things that weigh us down, the things that are heavy within oneself, the reincarnation and the destination of said reincarnation. Of course, we have accumulated a collection of knickknacks in our soul, that belong to a realm, and we have to then go there. And obviously the collection of things that belong to the not so pleasant realms, the sooner we unburden ourselves from those things, the lesser the chance of our visiting there is. It's when you go abroad and you come back and you find in your pocket or your purse or in your wallet some spare change from a set country you just visited. So if you got złotych and you've been to Poland, and if you got whatever currency from whatever country you just visited from, and it's sort of this kind of reversal thing, right? How much currency you have for which country, and if you only have collected I don't know, rupees, then you're only going to India.
Yeah, you don't have access to another destination.
Right. And so this idea of unburdening ourselves from the unnecessary is an ongoing thing. So I think this, to kind of tidy it all up, first step in gracefully aging is to understand what that means, what is to be expected, without the fear, or without the denial that seems to be a thing that is wanted largely in the world, right?
Yes.
The hiding away of the things that are unpleasant, and this is again the Buddha's life, right? He lives his youth with things unpleasant hidden away from him by his father, on account of the foretelling of Asita, to say that if he sees and if he finds out about this business of birth, old age, sickness, and death, he's gonna leave the castle. And so the king says, no, I got this, and only beauty behold. It's you make a handicap of a person if you do that. Sometimes parents do that with their children. And so this idea, the first step is to understand the reality of what is and what are these parts of lives. And this isn't dark, and this isn't unpleasant. We've as a society, I think largely we've made it into something to turn away and don't look at the person missing a limb, because it's unpleasant,
it's gruesome,
to look at it. It's this kind of judgment that pulls this veil over our eyes of the superficialities of things is really crippling. Like I said, this cycle, because then we never hear the stories, we never take on the wisdom before we visit those aspects of lives. They've gone before us, and there's a wisdom in having lived a life. And that is to say, a person could be not a great person.
Sure.
And they have a lesson to teach you there. If you're a student, you could learn from the person who says, okay, I'm not doing that.
That's still a lesson, right?
Yeah.
Learning what not to do is a great lesson.
Sure. And that could be a legacy, right?
Yeah.
Grandpa did X, Y, and Z. Make sure you don't do what Grandpa did.
Look what happened to him.
Right. And it's but we have this judgmental kind of thing that we have. And so, don't do that.
Yeah. I personally learned a lot about aging through observation, right, through watching my grandparents. And my grandmother really instilled me with some very bright lessons that I carry with me into the future. And one of them being a very important point, and as you go into old age, carry a light-hearted, happy mind as best as you can. And your body can age, but you can keep your mind as youthful as possible. One of the things that many people fear nowadays is the decline of memory as people get older. And I watched my grandmother maintain her memory into her 90s. And I observed, like, what is her secret? And one of the things that she always shared with me, she would hand me a piece of paper, and it was like old yellow paper, like from notebooks. Like, mind you, like I haven't seen that type of paper in a long time. And she'd be like, tell me any name on that list. And then she would be able to recite quickly the phone number. And I counted all the numbers on that list. There were about 62. And she knew every single one of them. And in my head, I'm like, damn, I'm stupid. How many
I know two.
Yeah, I know, like
mine and
2
yours.
or 3, right? But so she didn't. There's that old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So she said to me every night before she went to bed, she would study it. Right? So she didn't allow something new like the advent of technology to become a crutch. She still used that part of the brain, and literally I saw it thrive, right? So if you don't use it, you lose it. Find something, put it into practice, and continue to do it so that you lose that faculty. And then the second thing is she always liked to joke, and she kept on, looking at things that were humorous, and she would write a lot of poetry, and she would make some points that were funny, but also shocking. And I'll never forget this one thing that she did. She would go to these events. It was called Las Niñitas, and it's the little girls, but they were all over like 60 and older, right? It was a meeting of women. And they would have various speakers go there. And one day they had her speak, and she recited one of her poems. And she told me the story. And she had this one line, and she told me people's face were all in shock because it's in Spanish, and I'll say it in Spanish, and I'll explain, right? So she gets up there, and she's telling her poetry, and she gives them this line. She goes, en vez de nosotros enseñarlos a bailar danzón, nosotros tenemos que aprender a bailar reggaetón. And so what she's saying there, them, enseñarlos, is the youth. Like our grandkids are the youth. And danzón is a traditional Cuban dance. And reggaeton is a very modern, sexy type of dancing. So she basically is telling everyone in the audience, she's like, we shouldn't be out there teaching the future generations these old dances. We have to get out there and learn to dance reggae, which is a very provocative, sexy, grinding type of dance. So she's like, all the older ladies, it was like, everyone was blushing and things like that. But she had a way of making those points. But in essence, though, the underlying point is you have to maintain a lighthearted, humorous mind, and you can keep your spirit youthful as your body ages, right? So,
yeah. Keep a light heart.
Yeah,
it's good.
Light heart. Yeah,
I think it's a good place to end.
Yeah.
We never get
fully through,
right? And it's because as we've said, we frequently, this is evolving. It's a conversation. We haven't prepared typed up scripts, and so as such, we sometimes meander into other regions, but.
We get to where we gotta
go. We get somewhere. We get somewhere.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is because now I'm having people ask questions.
Yeah.
They say, "Oh, in the podcast you said so and so," and it's I'm always kind of cautious when somebody says, you said, and I say, what did I do now? What did I say?
Right.
And because. Do they recall or do they know the context?
Right.
Do they,
it's
so, you said, and it's almost, yes, what I said, and if you ask the same question today, it might be a different answer too, right? You know why? Because I'm aging.
You're aging.
Hopefully gracefully.
The answer is different. Yes.
Hopefully gracefully.
Yes.
Hopefully there's more wisdom every time the same question asked. Hopefully there's some more wisdom in it. And some questions are sort of one of. There's an answer, and that is the answer. And then other things are ever evolving. And so, but at least the presentation of it changes. So, that's it. That's, I think, a good thing for the day.
Sure.
Aging gracefully.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Nyungan Senyum.
I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert, from my heart to yours. Remember, subscribe and like, and if you like what you hear, pass it on to somebody else. Thank you very much.